Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our Live Ignites meetup, a part of our MLOpsforGood virtual hackathon, which is taking place until the end of this month. For those who aren't familiar with it, this hackathon calls upon data scientists, data engineers, and MLOps engineers to bring data science to production for social good. And you'll hear all about the idea behind it, the types of issues that we encourage teams to tackle, the technologies available to you, and practical information on getting started. We have a jam-packed hour planned for you, with lightning talks by some of our judges and community partners, each spanning roughly 10 minutes. We'll begin with opening remarks by Iguazio co-founder and CEO Asaf Somek. Then we'll hear from Cecile Bilius, Head of Impact and Sustainability at Pitango Venture Capital, about using tech for good. Daniel Jeffries, Managing Director of the AI Infrastructure Alliance, will then speak about practical AI ethics now and in the future. He'll be followed by Orit Nissan-Messing, co-founder and VP Architecture at Iguazio, who will take us on a walkthrough of MLRun, the open source MLOps orchestration framework. And finally, Adi Hirstein, VP Product at Iguazio, will give us practical tips on getting started with your MLOpsforGood hackathon project. Before I hand it over to Asaf, I just wanted to thank our partners, MongoDB, Microsoft, and Aztec, and all of our wonderful community partners for supporting this cause. It's so great to see the data science community come together like this and collaborate on projects that will make real-world impact. It's also exciting to see so many women participants and even an all-girl team that has already signed up. Now, without further ado, I will pass it over to Asaf.
Thank you, Sahar, and thank you everybody for joining. So today we're in fact combining communities and awareness. And what I like about it is when it comes to awareness for tech for good, there's so much to be done yet. And this is where Cecile and Dan were both talking about how to harness corporates to do more and to harness technology for the purpose of good. And we'll be talking, Cecile and Dan will be talking about doing it from corporate perspective, the ethics perspective of things, and then still on awareness for MLOps. I mean, right, the two parts, MLOps for good, good and MLOps need awareness. So MLOps as a term, over the past 2 years, we see it rising, but still many organizations, when it comes to AI, are not aware of the complexities around deploying it, and especially when it comes to productizing it, to bringing it to the operation, or as we call it, bringing machine learning to life. And this is where MLRun and the community effort around it is part of what we're doing here, and creating more awareness around MLOps. And Orit and Adi will be taking us today to better understand how to harness machine learning for good, and to better understand the details around MLRun and how you actually can work with it and build entire pipelines at a fraction of the time it takes today. We see too many companies failing in the AI efforts, and it has to do with all these complexities that arise when they're trying to build their production pipeline. And this hackathon serves the two purposes: A, to bring good using MLOps technologies, and also to create awareness around MLOps itself. And as Sahar was saying, we appreciate the community effort that has taken off here. We're super surprised to see so many communities join us. I'll just share here my thank you slide. And so first, Sarah mentioned our partners, Microsoft, MongoDB, and Aztec. Really appreciate all the help and the funding that was brought into this effort. And as you can see, we have 11 communities from different places on the planet that are joined in and are bringing their people into this effort. We love this participation, and it was 8 communities a few days ago, and we see more and more people joining. And as Sahar said, this hackathon will last till the end of June, and we expect to see more people joining. So with that, I'll hand it off to Cecile, And I really appreciate all the effort that was done around it and all the people that are bringing their great projects into the hackathon. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Asaf. Next up, we'll hear from Cecile, Head of Impact and Sustainability at Patango Venture Capital, and she will be speaking about tech as a force for good, but how? Cecile.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sal, and thank you, Iguazio, and the whole team for inviting me to participate here. The first thing I want to say to everyone is really to congratulate you, because you're here because you decided to put in your effort and talent, knowledge, time, everything you have into doing something that will benefit everyone or benefit the planet at large and society. So that is quite remarkable. And I think you should really be congratulated and thanked for doing that. It's not trivial to retain your ability to do something good for everyone else. And I think this is really amazing. So congratulations to you all, and thank you. Next, I'd like to try to frame the world of impact and the world of the Sustainable Development Goals and what it actually means to have an impact. Now, I know that making an impact and feeling good about doing something is intuitive, and we all think that just by doing something that we feel good about will make an impact. But unfortunately, sometimes it's just not good enough. And why it's not good enough is because we want to be directed, we want to be clear about what we're trying to achieve, and we also want to connect with challenges that have already been defined by others, so that we really have an impact. Plus, making an impact can be done in many different ways. And there's really more than one way to address any given issue. So it can be through a not-for-profit activity, a for-profit activity, a tech activity, anything that we can think of, which is really a great way to feel good about doing something with your talent. But if you really retain your abilities to focus on things that are defined as global challenges, then I think that will in itself create much more impact, and it will also allow you to connect to other projects and programs that are trying to address the same challenges. So I've built a presentation that is a resource for you all to use. And I'm going to talk about 2 slides in this presentation that will help you frame the impact that you're trying to make and really do it in a way that is efficient and sustainable. The first thing that you need to do is really to clearly define the problem that you're trying to address. And sometimes people feel good about a project that they're doing, or they feel themselves a problem that they are familiar with. It could be someone with an illness in the family. It could be something that bugs you in the environment that you'd like to address. And that is a really good way to start, but it's also important to frame it in the global context. The global context has been defined by the UN in 2015 through a set of 17 goals that are designed here on the screen, and they are called the Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that each one of them actually is described into specific indicators. So if you press on the link in the presentation, you'll go to the website of the Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll be able to read the indicators. There are 169 indicators that are actually the description of what needs to be done in each and every goal. So it should be a very easy read, and it should be easy for you also to connect with the relevant indicator that will help you also focus your efforts. Now, once you've looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, which are to be achieved by 2030, and the whole world is colliding around those 17 goals, so it should be a language that you'll be able to speak, you should ask yourselves these questions. So, do you believe in making a positive impact? Obviously, you do, because you're here. So what are the global challenges that you're trying to address? And really go focus very much on that. And think about your company or your project's mission. Now, how do you anchor your project around the SDG. You try to think about what is already existing in terms of solutions. And maybe what is currently existing is either not affordable or not accessible or not well written. And if we think about data science and machine learning, this is, the open source is really the purest form of impact, I think. So if you think about the ways to address challenges through your capabilities in this hackathon, you'll be able to design solutions that should be affordable and accessible. Another thing you should think about is your stakeholder group. That is actually very, very important. When you're thinking about addressing a goal, you should be thinking about who is going to be the beneficiary of your solution. Who are these people? What is wrong with what they currently have? What is the problem that they have that can be described through that particular indicator? And how do you create value for them? How does your product actually bring benefit to these stakeholders? Then try to think about the size of the problem. Is it a global problem? Is it something very focused? Can it scale? Who are the people that are most at risk? Where should you focus your effort? For example, if you're trying to tackle a really big goal, maybe that can't be done in a project that will be taking place in a hackathon, and you should really focus on something that is smaller but more achievable. And what will happen with your solution after the hackathon? Can something be done with it? Can someone carry it over to execution? Can that be formed into a company or a project or a nonprofit or some sort of activity that will actually lead you to really execute your solution in real life? And another important point is, how can this innovation really catalyze further change? So are you able to think systemically on a solution that will be able to draw in additional solutions and additional projects that will derive out of that? Now, in the next slide, Risa, can you please move to the next slide? Yes, thank you. Here is a methodology that will help you think about your solution and the project that you're doing through the stakeholders' eyes. So as we said, you should try to define who your stakeholders are, what are the desired outcomes and outputs for these stakeholders, and what are the activities and resources you need to make this happen. Now, I brought an example which is very far from the world of machine learning, but just because I think it's an easy example to understand. Let's say that one of the challenges in SDG number 4, which is education for girls in developing countries, where girls that are experiencing their menstrual period are actually staying home and not attending school. So that is a problem that can be defined and designed. Then we start by understanding who the stakeholders and beneficiaries are. In that case, the non-schooled girls will be the first, obviously. The schools and the teachers are the next. The parents are stakeholders. The schooled boys are stakeholders as well as the public institutions. Then we're thinking, what are the resources that we can use in order to address this challenge? In this case, reusable pads are the resource, and the staff to explain and to support the girls in using these reusable pads can be a very strong resource. Then we move to the activities. What are the activities that need to be done in order to create the solution? The activity in this case is to distribute the reusable pads. Of course, how to do this and in which way to do it is according to the staff and to the actual problem. Then the output that we expect to happen from our activities is that the number of reusable pads that are distributed grows. So the more reusable pads are distributed to girls, then the bigger the output is. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is the actual impact, and the impact is the outcome. The outcome is that actually is the increase of the percentage of girls that are actually able to finish school. So it's easy to see how you start by understanding that the problem is that girls are not going to school for several days per month, and therefore are missing out on school, and they're following behind their fellow students. And if you're using the right resources, creating the right activity, and the output is high enough, the result should be that there will be an increase of girls that are actually finishing school. So this is a good way to look at the stakeholder value and the outcome logic. So I think that by using those two methodologies, looking at the SDGs, understanding and verbalizing the problem you're trying to address through the eyes of the relevant indicator, and applying the stakeholder and outcome logic, you can frame the project that you're trying to do in a way that you can decide before you start what is the desired outcome for each stakeholder, and then drive your project through to do that. So I hope this has been helpful. Please do look at the presentation as a whole to be able to draw in any kind of assistance that you need. I'll be available for questions if necessary, for any clarifications and thoughts, and maybe help in the process. And I really do wish you all luck in addressing these challenges that you're trying to address, and really hope that you'll have a lot of fun. I think that really doing good and participating in a project like this feels great. So I certainly feel great about it. I hope you do too. And good luck and have fun.
Thanks so much, Cecile, for that great presentation. Next up, we'll be hearing from Daniel, Managing Director of the AI Infrastructure Alliance. And Daniel's going to be speaking to us about practical AI ethics now and in the future. Daniel.
Hey, thanks for having me on. So as you said, I'm Managing Director of the AI Infrastructure Alliance. We have a number of large goals in terms of AI interoperability, but one of them is practical AI ethics, which has been a particular passion of mine, where I've done a decent amount of consulting around this front. And what I found as I look through, when you're thinking about this, right? So Cecile was just talking about, like, the various ways that you approach this from the business level or from the societal level. But from a machine learning perspective, I'm going to talk about when your algorithms go wrong and start to make mistakes, right? And as the algorithms are making decisions, and more and more decisions in our lives, how do we know that we can trust those decisions, right? And there's a whole number of nightmare examples in artificial intelligence where things have gone totally wrong. So you think about Microsoft Tay being exposed to the trolls of the internet and suddenly becoming racist. You think about Uber's self-driving car hitting and killing a woman in Arizona in the middle of the night, or stop signs fooling a convolutional neural network because they have different stickers on them, right? But the interesting thing is those are just kind of the big problems, and there's a number of sort of subtler problems that are often missed in this space. So if you think about resumes that are being checked by an algorithm, loans that are being given out, something, promotion or a demotion that's happening, right? And algorithms behind that, there are all kinds of ethical implications that are involved in it. And one of the ones that always comes to mind for me is the Compass recidivism score in Florida, which advises judges on whether somebody should go to jail or not. And if you think about it, there are a number of technical problems with it. One is it's a black box, and we don't necessarily know everything that goes into it, but we've been able to deduce a lot of those things. And what you'll notice is when they are trying to make something too broad and too general, where they can't sort of take sensitive characteristics into account, it may be too broad actually to be very effective. And so judges sort of run into this inevitable old problem of putting innocent people in jail or letting guilty people go free, right? And there's kind of two sides of the equation when you think about these things. But if you were actually able to focus in on certain characteristics, you might actually be able to make the algorithm better, right? And so thinking clearly about how you detect bias or how you make these algorithms better is incredibly important. For instance, if you were to think about socioeconomic status, for instance, that would break up the model so that it's not necessarily universal across like every type of crime that you could commit, from white collar fraud to sticking up a liquor store. But there's all kinds of other subtler problems in that too, and that if a judge isn't savvy, for instance, they might not understand that the computer's not always right, and so we need to be able to deal with these things. So how do we really deal with these things? So one of them is explainable AI, and we're starting to make a lot of work in that area. So if we think about the Infrastructure Alliance, or the IA for short, you have something like Selden's explainability or alibi framework. You have Fiddler's work on explainability. But some of these things are very well done. We have excellent algorithms for that, and we can think about counterfactual fairness, for instance, and changing a few sensitive characteristics so that to see whether the algorithm gives the same output. But some things are still kind of really cutting edge research, right? When we look at how a convolutional neural net is making decisions, it might highlight the pixels that it used to figure out it was a cat or a human being, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's truly explainable. We're still defining what explainability means, and so these things are ongoing, and they're not enough to kind of solve this problem. So really, how do most organizations try to solve this problem? Well, they inevitably form an AI ethics committee, and they get together, they sing songs, they inevitably put out a white paper that in a report that includes the words inclusive and fair. And Cecile talked about feeling good, but the problem with something like this is that it sounds great, it feels good, but really these are just abstract concepts and platitudes that mean something to human beings, but are not actionable steps for machine. So inevitably what ends up happening is the paper comes out, nothing really changes. It's not implementable by data scientists. It's not implementable by data engineers. And so really nothing changes and nothing really gets done. So what I argue for is essentially two different teams that you want to think about as you're kind of building out these projects, right? It's one thing to mess around with these things on the laptop, but also if you start thinking about doing these things at scale in an enterprise team, you're really going to need two different teams. One is a customer public-facing team, and the other is an AI red team, right? So we'll talk about what each of those are in turn. So a customer public-facing team is someone that is trained to respond to your internal customers or the general public when AI goes wrong, right? And so when you think about something horrible happening, like Google Photos labeling people of color, as gorillas, people are rightly angry about this, and they were hurt by this. And imagine you wake up that one day and you see this happen, and you're infuriated about it. But they had to cobble together a response to this, right? They didn't have people who were trained in how AI makes mistakes, and so they don't have anybody there to just explain to the public that this wasn't a rogue coder, for instance, that did this deliberately to hurt people, right? So you need a team that's trained in advance to be able to talk to people. Or if it's an internal customer team, and somebody's passed over for a promotion, or a friend didn't get through for a job because their resume didn't come through the screener. How do you explain that to people, and how do you deal with internal disputes? You could end up having a disputes team, for these kinds of things. And you want to be able to explain these things in a consistent way, say that we're on top of these things, we're dealing with it, we know that there's a problem, and we're dealing with it in this way. And then this AI red team is a group of traditional coders, data scientists, data engineers, MLOps engineers, and what they're really doing is figuring out creative ways to triage a short-term solution, right, and come up with a long-term solution. So if you think about the Google Photos example earlier, their initial triage solution was to just keep the convolutional neural net from labeling anything, right, as an animal. Now, they got a lot of negative press for this, but it is actually an effective triage, short-term solution. When you think of the word triage, it means short-term solution. Like if you come to the hospital bleeding, the triage nurse has to be able to deal with this. So that stops the problem in the very short term. The challenge was that they didn't deal with it in a longer term, right? And so a longer term is where the AI red team starts to come into place. And they start to think about, okay, how do we solve this? Well, we have to expand the data set, or maybe we need a synthetic data set to generate this, or maybe we need a better labeling, and we need to go back and look at the labeling with versioning and history, these kinds of things. And that team is going to need to be very cross-functional. They're going to need to have legal authority, for instance, if they need to go buy another data set, or maybe use the data set in-house for a trial period before they put a model into production, or maybe they need to have the authorization to go out and take more photos to expand a particular data set, right? These kinds of things can be addressed, but they requires a lot of creative thinking, critical thinking to get these things done. And if we think about like how you would do this in practice, and when people are just starting to spin up their projects, right, maybe on their laptop, they're doing a pip install and maybe some TensorFlow or some PyTorch. When you start doing this at scale, you need to start thinking about the design patterns that we already have from IT and coding best practices, right? So that's version control of data, metadata, snapshots and rollback, a CI/CD, in particular unit testing and integration tests, auditing and logging, right? So as legislation starts to come down the pike, you want to be able to deal with these things. But automated unit testing, for instance, as you change your model at some level, there was an example of Lyft, for instance, their self-driving cars starting to starting to slam on the brakes because there was like 2% of the world's left-hand turn signals were yellow instead of green. They couldn't detect them. So having their folks come into the virtual environment and paint those yellow left-hand turn signals, and then retraining the model, there now needs to be sort of a unit test to see is it still kind of hitting on the brakes all the time. And then if you think about a facial recognition database or something like that, people need to be able to go back in time, say to solve this sort of EU legislation with a right to be forgotten, right? Be able to go back and say we need to pull these things out, right? So you need to have version control and metadata. You need to have auditing throughout the entire process so they understand what's happening, right? And in particular, again, you really need creative problem solving here. There has to be critical thinkers, interdisciplinary thinkers. They have to be able to think about the long-term solutions to these challenges. Maybe they have to build a business-based rule system to augment a black box system, right? A neural net with weighted scores in order to fix something, or they need to creatively form a synthetic data set, right? These kinds of things are the kinds of folks that you need on that team to really solve these problems. And when I look at kind of the way that and then testing. This is a universal problem. Every organization is going to face these challenges in the coming decade. No industry, no person, no organization is going to be untouched by the power of algorithmic decision making. When you think about how ethics has been dealt with in the past, we really need better ways to audit, control, and to understand what we mean by ethics. What I inevitably find when I consult with groups is I design a 50-page system internally of humans in the loop and a complaints board and how to rate vendors based on whether they're actually using an algorithm for detecting bias or whether it's just in their marketing, right? And very rarely do the companies have any actually commentary on that. What they inevitably have commenting on is the 10 platitudes that kind of go on the website, but that's not the essence of ethics. The essence of ethics and the essence of practical understanding of how to deal with problems in the ML spaces, you're trying to solve these real world problems, is to build in the components from the very beginning to be able to deal with it throughout the entire MLOps life cycle from beginning to end. And it cannot be an afterthought. It cannot be something that you just graft on. There's no time to wait until tomorrow. You have to be able to design better monitoring, management processes, best practices today. And I encourage everyone to do that. That's one of the focuses of the AI Infrastructure Alliance, with our friends at Iguazio are a part of. And I encourage everyone to check it out at ai-infrastructure.org. We need all the help that we can get to build better universal solutions and a LAMP stack for AI ML. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and that's so true. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Orit Nissan-Messing, co-founder and VP Architecture at Iguazio, and she's going to take us on a walkthrough of ML Run and show some practical MLOps workflows.
Hi. What I would like to do is take you through the low world of machine learning, which is the IRIS model, going through a walkthrough to the different development stages of data science, from cleaning the data, training a model, take this model into production for serving, and lastly, we'll see how you create a Kubeflow pipeline, all of this using ML Run, which is MLOps open source framework. So I'll go sharing my screen. I'll try to do that as quickly as possible. We have 10 minutes for this entire walkthrough. So can you see my Jupyter notebook? I'll take it as a yes. Okay, so if you think about the IRIS model, it doesn't have a lot of cleaning data that needs to be done, but we would like to show the steps. So if you would write in Python code a cleaning of the IRIS data sets, what you usually do is take this species and change it into numerical category numbers. So your function, your code will look like something like this cell. If you want to create an ML function, which can run afterwards automatically with logging of everything, all the runs, the monitoring. So what you do is, it's this kind of code. You annotate the code with this magic command of ML Run, which notates when it starts and when it ends. And you had this context. Now you can do log result, which is the same as you had with the code of returning the shape. And you can also log the data set. So now after this function will run, at any time, you can go back to see this run and all the data that is received and created upon this run. So what we'll do now is we'll take this function and convert it into an MLRun function. This is just as basic as do co2 function for that method. And we'll run it on a cluster. So we'll take that function, we'll do a run, we'll provide it with an input. This is the CSV, which is located in Wasabi. It's a CSV of the iris data model. And we run it on a cluster. We can also run it locally within the Jupyter notebook if we'll provide the local equals to true. What we see here is the monitoring. You can monitor it through the Jupyter notebook, and I'll also show you in a bit how we can also monitor it through a fully integrated UI. So now that we have a function that ran and created a clean code, we can go next and train the model. So it looks pretty much, the basic look the same. We annotate the code with a MLRun start code and end code. We'll take the data set that is the input, and we'll break it into two different data sets, one for the training and one for the validation. We'll run the logical regression, and we'll log the model that is resulted from that run. So we'll convert this code into a MLRun function, and we can run it. When we run it, we'll provide it with a data set, which is exactly where we created the result from the cleaning of the data. So before we'll go into reviewing the entire different sets, we'll go to see that how it looks from UI perspective. So this is the project. This is Iris admin project. We've seen the prep data that I've created and the training. And if I'll go to the training, I can see that I already ran this function numerous of times. I can see each one of those different runs. And on each of these different runs, I can see an overview of this function, but I can also see what was the input, what were the artifacts, and I can actually go and click on each one of these artifacts and get to this specific one. I can see, for example, that was the result of the confusion matrix. And there is the model here as well. And we can have the results of that function. Okay, so let's continue to look at the flow. So I have a model that we trained using the data that we already cleaned. And now we can also, using the same thing as we saw in the UI, using Python code, see the output. We can also play with it in pandas, like we can do get data item, receive the output as a data frame, and then we can start do exploration on that data frame within pandas. And lastly, we'll see another option that is we have in MLRun is we have something which is called a function marketplace. It's functions that we already created, a generic function to do like generic kind of workloads. So in this case, I can do an import for a function that was already created within the function hub and run exploration function that will describe different things on the model that we already created. And we can see that histograms numbers here. Same thing is we can take another function hub function. We'll do an import again. Now the function is test classify, is testing the model, and we can run this function. We just do test, run, and run that against the model that we already created. So next we have now a model that we logged into the system, and we would like to create an online serving of this model. So we have MLRun comes with Nucleo, which is another open source, which is a serverless framework with high throughput, low latency, a serverless framework. And so what we want to do now is take the model that we have and deploy it into a real-time serving. So what we do now is define two different methods. One is the load, which will take the model and will load it into memory, the pickle file. And the other one is predict. This is the function that you'll call when you want to predict if something is an iris or not, which type of it. So in this example, we see that there is a one-to-one mapping between the serving function and the model, but you can actually have one serving function serve many different models. So we create the same as we saw before. We'll take this code, which is serving. We'll create a function out of it. It has a specific class, and we add the model as a file to that function, and we apply that function. So now we have a Nucleo function that is running, and you can invoke it with infer in two different methods. You can invoke it like you have the server function address. You can do invoke and send the data. You can do the same thing using curl, for example. So if we go into project, got this connection issue, sorry. So we'll see here that I have a Nucleo, real-time Nucleo function. This is the serving function. And we can see here the code, the different configuration that was created for me through that code that we add, like the iris admin, what's the address of the API, stuff like that. And the status is that is running. I can also test it through the test button. But as we can see here, I can test that. Not sure that now with the internet problem it will be running, but I can send the data, and the model will reply with if it's running or not. The information of that. So lastly, now that I have got some network issues, sorry. So now that I have the test, the train, prep data running, what I would really like to do in a production kind of framework is have a pipeline that runs the different steps and retrain when needed. So for that, we can see like defining a kubeflow pipeline using MLRun. So we define the project, we add the functions to that, and we define here a workflow, which is the DSL for pipeline. And we can see that by annotating, for example, in this case, that the input for that train is the data set, which is the output of the previous step, that will know how to create the graph for the kubeflow pipeline, like annotating which steps comes after which. So we create a workflow here. We set that workflow on the project. And we can run that project. What we'll see is that the entire pipeline is being created, and I hope I can show you that, sorry. So we can see that this is the run of this pipeline. We can see the different steps of that with all the information, and we can also see the different steps, the runs. If we look here for the different Sorry, we can see you with all the different aspects of that run as well. So what we've seen here is that we can use ML Run to go through an automation of the entire workflow from cleaning to training to serving a function in real time, and have a pipeline that automates everything and can also have a monitoring on this model to retrain when it detects a drift in the model itself and so on. But I didn't show that in this brief walkthrough. So I hope it gives you some taste to go and look at ML Run to serve you as an MLOps framework. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alit. And if all of the sessions that you've heard so far have made you think about your own project, and if you're wondering how you can get started with the MLOps for Good Hackathon, next up we have Adi, who is going to be a VP product at Iguazio, and he's going to be giving us some practical tips on how to get started on your MLOps for Good Hackathon project. Adi.
All right, thanks, Sahar, and hi, everyone. I'm sure that you're all very excited by now, and you're asking yourself, okay, how can I get started? So in this session, I'm going to show you how to kick things off with this hackathon, and basically give you some guidance and what are the principles that you need to follow in order to get a successful project. So that's what I'm going to do in the next few minutes. So let me share my screen, and I'm going to show you how to actually start from scratch. So if you go to Google, you need to look for MLOpsforGood DevPost. So we're using this platform that is called DevPost in order to manage the hackathon. And this is the landing page of the hackathon. Now from here, go to the Resources tab. And under the Resources tab, you can see a couple of links. So the first one is very useful. Go to the Getting Started. And here you're going to get lots of information, basically all the information that you actually need, all the way from providing you some overview about what our expectation in terms of the business problem that you need to solve, as well as some links to ML Run and some other resources that you may want to use. Now, it's very, very important to emphasize that this hackathon is not like other hackathons that focus on let's find the best model, let's find the best algorithm for my machine learning model, but this is all about MLOps. So it's all about focusing on the operational aspect. So our expectation from you guys is, at the end of the day, to deliver a project can actually run in the real world. So we're expecting some kind of a deliverable that would be very similar to what we're seeing in a typical enterprise environment, where you can take your machine learning pipeline all the way and actually deploy it in a real operational environment. So in this page, you're going to see some useful information about the setups. So under that section, you have some links to the DevOps Hackathon page. So obviously, you need to register to that platform. How do you do that? Then you have some links to the Slack channel. In the Slack channel, we have you can find teammates. We can provide you answers for your questions, obviously, and then some links to the ML Run, the open source project that Orit just covered. So there are a couple of very useful links to get things started with ML Run, all the way from the ML Run concept, what it's all about, down to see some tutorials and the different aspects of ML Run, how you can use ML Run to do training, how you can use ML Run to get the data to do the model serving, and so on and so forth. Now, keep in mind when you start a project, it should be aligned with the concept of the hackathon. And here you have a couple of items that you probably want to read. So the alignment to the MLOps for Good, basically around social and environmental goals, is obviously very, very important. And there are a couple of other items that you need to follow. And then when it comes to actually create the pipeline, what we are expecting from you guys is to create a typical pipeline that starts with data collection and acquisition, feature engineering, model training, model serving, and then once you have this model deployed, last but not least, is basically to create an automated pipeline. That's going to be very, very cool if you can get to the full Monty of creating the MLOps pipeline. Now, in order to get started, we have a couple of tips here on how to get data sets. So you can go to those links here, and plenty of data sets in those repositories. And you don't necessarily need to get the data from there, but those are just suggestions. And then under the storage section, you get some information about how to store the data, especially when it comes to large data sets. So that's for the data collection. Then the training, there are some tips around what we are expecting from you guys in terms of feature engineering and training your model. And again, keep in mind that the goal here is not to create the best model ever, but it's mainly around the MLOps side of the house. And then once you have the model, how do you deploy it? How do you take the model and basically create a serverless function, as Reed just showed in the previous session, how to get the model, deploy it as a serverless function, and now you have an endpoint that can actually get requests and send back response and can really serve a real-world application. And the last piece, again, is going to be very, very cool if you can get to it, is to actually create an automated pipeline out of this. So think about a completeness of a pipeline. It's a pipeline that starts with data collection and acquisition, feature engineering, training, model training. You can do some testing and validation, then model serving, and then creating an automated pipeline out of it. So that's our expectation. Now, real quick on the scoring system. So again, the most important item here is the completeness of the pipeline. You're going to get up to 50 points if you complete this entire pipeline that I just described. Then you're going to get up to 15 points for novelty and innovation. So it's very important that the project at the end of the day would deliver the best, the most impact in terms of social impact. So that's extremely important. And then the ability to take what you've built and make it applicable in the real world. So to make it kind of commercial, that's going to give you another 10 points, up to 10 points. Then diversity obviously is yet another items that will give you 10 points. Building a real-time pipeline. We know that it's pretty hard to do it in a hackathon, but if you can do that, then it will give you another 5 points. Ability to retrain the model, another 5 points. And then if you want to use multiple machine learning models, that's yet another 5 points. Now, in terms of actually working in a real environment, there are two options here. One option is to get a cluster from Iguazio. So we can provide you a cluster where ML1 is already deployed there. So you just need to log in. Once you create a project, we basically give you all the information that you need. You log in into the cluster. You don't need to install anything. Everything is already there. You just need to start, kick things off and start writing your code. The other option is to download ML1 as the open source. So ML1 obviously is an open source. You just need to go to the repository, download the ML1 kit, and get things started. Now, in order to get more information about ML1, just go to this link here. And I really encourage you to review this ML1 page, ML1 documentation. Start with the quick start. That's going to give you a pretty good overview about what is ML1. So ML1, in a very high level, it's an orchestration layer that provides you the ability to run your Python code with different runtimes. So you can run it with Python, you can run it with Dask, you can even run Spark. And along the way, it also provides you the ability to do experiment tracking, to capture everything that you're running on in terms of your metadata on the experiments that you're running, and manage all the artifacts, the data sets, the models, the versions, all that kind of stuff, and also the ability to deploy a machine learning model at the end of the day and create a pipeline out of it. So it's really abstract some of the overhead that you may encounter in terms of working with DevOps to build your machine learning pipeline. So the idea is to make it much more smooth and easy in order to create a machine learning pipeline. So just go over here. If you want to install the ML1 kit, then just go to the installation guide. You need to know that ML1 needs to run on top of Kubernetes, but it's really simple. Even if you're working on your own laptop, you just need to install Docker Desktop, and you're going to get Kubernetes up and running on your Mac or Windows. And then from here, just follow the instruction. There are a couple of charts that you need to install, and that's it. It's going to take you 10 minutes, and you're going to be up and running. Now, if you have any questions, if you need support, obviously go to the Slack channel. So just go to this link, open up the Slack community, and from here, we'll be more than happy to answer your question. And if you're looking for teammates, you can do that from Slack as well. So just go to the community here, MLOPs, and we'll be more than happy. Here is Sahar. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions here and to help you. And in order to start your project, just go to the overview tab here. You can start a project from here, or you can look for teammates from this platform as well. So you can see some wonderful people already registered to the hackathon, and you can ping them and join those groups as well. So that's pretty much it on my end. We're going to do a workshop next week, so stay tuned and good luck.
Thanks so much, Adi, for that comprehensive overview. And we're coming towards the end of our session today. So at this point, I wanted to thank our speakers, Orit, Cecile, Daniel, Asaf, and Adi. Thank you so much for giving us all of this information and taking us through the different points. And I wanted to thank all of you for joining us. We invite you to visit the hackathon website, iguazio.com/hackathon, for more details and to join our MLOps Live community, as Adi just mentioned. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you and good luck.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Have fun.
Cheers, everyone.